they were major spreading events, and we even know that because some doctors in some ICUs, they stated that they saw that those people that are on the ICU, that they gathered together in those demonstrating events, or they were in buses that carried the demonstrators across Austria. Well, I think this is a huge discussion. In my point of view, what we see across the world in the last, or what we've been seeing in the last years, is growing polarization. So polarization takes place, and it is even enhanced by the so-called social media.
I would like to welcome our listeners to our podcast series, iGlobenews Pods. The title of our podcast today is The Neos and COVID, Past, Present, Future. Joining me today is the leader of Austria's Neos Party, Beate Meinl-Reisinger. Thank you, Beate. Hello. Thank you for joining me. iGlobenews is very honored that you took the time to talk to our listeners. This podcast will be posted on our website, www.iglobenews.org. I would like to take this opportunity to invite our listeners to visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, and become part of our iGlobenews community. Let me start by a brief introduction. You studied law in Vienna and have been active in politics since 2002. You worked in the cabinet of then State Secretary Christine Marek from Austria's People's Party, or the ÖVP, and were part of a movement to encourage the ÖVP to form a coalition with the Green Party, as opposed to forming a coalition with Austria's Freedom Party, the FPÖ. In 2012, you were a founding member of the Neos. The Neos saw themselves as a new, young alternative to the old party structures of the ÖVP. Neos, which in German stands for the New Austria and Liberal Forum, has been successful in Austrian politics ever since. You have held important positions within your party, as a member of parliament, as the head of the Vienna Neos group, as a member of the Vienna parliament, and since 2018, you took over the head of the Neos party and you lead the Neos fraction in the Austrian National Assembly. The Neos are currently in a governing coalition with the Social Democrats, also known as the SPÖ, in Vienna. The mayor of Vienna, Michael Ludwig, chose the Neos over the Vienna Green Party. You are married and have 3 children. The topics we will cover today are all COVID related, as this topic is on most people's minds. We have put together some relevant issues from COVID past, present, and future. We will start with the present, then move to the past, and conclude our interview with how you see Austria moving forward and past this crisis. So here are some questions regarding with the present issues.
And just add some point, because we are also in a coalition with the ÖVP, with the Conservative Party in Salzburg, which is
excellent.
very important for me, because we show actually right now that we are capable of governing and building a coalition with the sort of like center right and center left, which is, I think, very important also maybe for the future of Austria.
Excellent. Thank you for that. No, that is very important because I wanted to show that the Neos are not only an opposition party, but that you also actually have taken on responsibility and are in governing positions. I'll start with a question from Vienna. Vienna's Mayor Ludwig announced that as of 17th of May, schools in Vienna will once again be open. As of 19th of May, hotel, restaurants, theaters, cinemas, fitness studios, to name a few, will also be opening. Do you feel that with an incidence rate in Austria of currently 124, daily cases in Austria hovering at around 1,200, and new mutant viruses appearing on a regular basis, this degree of opening could lead to unintended consequences, such as the surge of new cases?
Well, one must stress that Vienna was very hesitating in opening. So there was a big discussion, should Vienna open as the other like federal states beginning with the 19th of May. And I think it's very good that Vienna also opens up. Why? Because yes, on one hand, there will be a rise on infections. no doubt on that. But on the other hand, we see a very increasing share of people vaccinated. And most importantly, we see that it is very, very effective that especially the older and more risky groups are being vaccinated, because that really reduces also the load of people that come to a hospital and bring the ICU capacities over the limit. This was the situation in Vienna a few weeks ago, but it was very successful to do another lockdown or even maybe talk about it, because what we saw is that not only the numbers in the east of Austria, that is Vienna and Lower Austria and Burgenland, dropped down, but also in other states where there hasn't been such a hard lockdown. So what I see is that the adherence of people depends very much on the communication that is taking place by the government. May be it the federal government or the Viennese government or local governments. So people saw that the situation in the ICUs, they were dramatic and they behaved differently. And now I think we are in a situation of opening up. I think it's also very necessary. I think the society needs it, the educational system needs it, the young people need it, and also the economy needs that. And we are very, very optimistic that with the seasonal effect of summer and of more and more people getting vaccinated, that will be successful. What I want to stress out is that what is really, really successful in Austria and also in Vienna, especially in Vienna, I must say, is that we were capable to build up a really good testing regime. We test a lot of people, and a lot of people do these testings on a very regular basis. I think it was a huge success to implement in Vienna this system of alles gurgelt. Probably you've heard about it. So
yes.
This is a PCR standard test that you can do at home on a very low level, even with the children, regularly, several times a week. And I think this is, as long as we have all the people vaccinated that wants to be vaccinated, this is a very good strategy, because we were able to really we saw a very damping effect on the infections, even though there were broadly openings at the beginning of February.
Yes, I mean, Austria definitely has been doing actually quite well. And we opened up in Vorarlberg much earlier, and that has served kind of as a model for other states within Austria. But one also has to say that the cases in Vorarlberg did go up after they opened, which is why I asked the question. So I think it could be that we're going to see a surge here as well. And of course, you're completely correct. Austria is a world champion when it comes to testing. And the Germans in this case are actually quite behind us and are looking at Austria.
They're not a champion when it comes to vaccinations, which would be much better, even more better, because testing is always a sort of a bridge strategy towards having all the people vaccinated that want to be vaccinated.
For sure. You already mentioned vaccinating, and that brings me to the next topic I wanted to address in this connection, namely in Germany and Austria. It is heavily debated whether those who have received one jab or two jabs, in the case of Germany, should be given more freedom than those who have not yet received the vaccine. It is the dichotomy of constitutional rights versus not wanting to privilege certain groups. The Austrian parliament has just amended the relevant laws to make this happen. Every person who has the first vaccine will be granted relief from corona restrictions after 3 weeks. Your party voted to support this, yet voiced criticism on the European Digital Green Pass because of data protection issues. Chancellor Kurz has announced that he already would like to push ahead with the Green Pass by the beginning of June. Could you elaborate on this issue and how you would suggest to solve the problem of reliability in identifying those who have had the vaccine or who are immune?
Well, one must see that the underlying question, when you talk about the Green Pass or other strategies, I mean, the Green Pass is mainly a technology. The underlying question is whether we can still uphold and withhold fundamental rights and freedoms from people who literally do not pose any or not as much risk to other people transmitting the coronavirus. I think it is necessary to stress that individual freedom rights and fundamental rights, they are not a privilege. So it's not about privileging a certain group of people, but to do something that is necessary to give freedom to those who do not impose any threat or harm to other people. What was important for NEAS, and this is an important point to talk about, that as long as the Austrian government, the Austrian state, is not capable of providing vaccinations to all people, we have to find a way that we can offer these freedoms or grant these freedoms and fundamental rights also to other people. And that's why we strongly were in favor of having a green pass or whatever that says, okay, we talk about the freedoms of people who are vaccinated. We talk about the freedoms of people that have had COVID and they have a lot of antibodies in their system. And we also want to propose the same freedoms and fundamental rights to those who are tested. Because you cannot say, yeah, let's open up only for vaccinated people. Then we will have literally a lot of parties of our grandparents and parents. I think it's necessary to also provide these testing regimes because otherwise it doesn't work. The longer the COVID situation takes place and the more people are vaccinated, the stronger we have to discuss whether it is then still possible to uphold this system of like, are you tested? Are you, did you have COVID or are you vaccinated? I think when it comes to fundamental rights and to freedom, you always have to keep in mind that it is necessary that you have to explain why you restrain those fundamental rights. You do not have to explain why you have those fundamental rights, but if you want to restrain them. And I'm a lawyer, and I would say the most important part is what's the word? Verhältnismäßigkeit. How would you put it in English?
The test of proportionality.
Yeah, the proportionality. So this discussion will definitely take place, but for the time being, I think this idea of the Green Pass is a fruitful way to get over the coming months. But I must say that Austria is not capable of providing any digital solution. So far, the Green Pass in Austria is nothing else than just, I must say, like showing your not digital vaccination passport or your paper stating that you're tested right now. So yes, there will be a lot of water going down the Danube, as we say, until we have these digital solutions.
Yes, I mean, you're definitely right on that. I think the plan is, as far as I've been following it, is that you start with the pass that you mentioned and then move on to, I guess, in collaboration with the EU. I take it the EU will take the lead in this, move to this digital pass. I think maybe the Israeli system has been an example of how to open safely, but then again, they have a very different system within their society. So I think they're very much all the citizens already have some apps on their phone, which of course is not the case in Austria.
They have a fully digitalized health system, which we have not at all, and this is one part of the problem that we saw over the last months, that Austria is lags really behind when it comes to digitalization. Like, for example, Israel went this way of cooperating with the big pharma tech companies like Pfizer, BioNTech, to provide so many vaccinations in such a short time. In reward, they gave health data to those companies. Apart from the fact that I'm convinced that Europe and also Austria has another way of looking at individual rights and privacy rights, we wouldn't have been capable of doing so, because there is no digitalization in the health system. We simply lack of data. And this is one part of the problem. What I want to stress when it comes to the Green Pass, I think it's also necessary to always keep in mind the bureaucracy that takes place. So us as NEOS, we were always in favor of, yes, testing regimes, but only at those places where it is manageable. For one example is, we were convinced that it is not manageable that when you enter a shop, in every shop, it is controlled whether you have been vaccinated or whether you have had COVID or you have been tested. So you can ask for those, the provision of the Green Pass or whatever, when it is also manageable. In other ways, you have to always keep in mind the bureaucracy and the burden you put on the economy.
Of course, I mean, it has to be financeable as the first step in implementation. Maybe you already mentioned the pharma companies, so let me move on to another very present topic. COVAX has failed. It is undeniable that poorer countries are struggling much more to procure enough vaccine. The troubling pictures coming out of India are proof enough. President Joe Biden has now agreed to temporarily lift intellectual property rights on vaccines. The EU has agreed with this, as has Chancellor Kurz. President Macron noted
on being open to discussion.
Open to discussion?
Something completely different, but let's see.
That's true. I mean, she did say she's open to discussion. It hasn't been decided yet, but she didn't right away say, no, this is not something that we will discuss at all. But I mean, like lifting the intellectual property rights is one issue. But then the technology transfer, of course, for the production of the vaccine itself is another. So just because you can do it doesn't mean that you will be able to do it.
Yes, yes.
What should the West, in your opinion, do to facilitate that vaccines reach poorer countries? And in connection with this, will investors be willing to spend billions in R&D if the lifting of a patent right negatively affects their return on investment?
For sure, this is a very, very important point that you're talking about. One must see that in general, reliable intellectual property rights, they lead to innovation, they lead to risk-taking, and they are very strong incentive for companies to be innovative, even in areas and fields that are not so, probably successfully. So I'm in a way very skeptical about really lifting intellectual property rights, because this might be the way to really tempering in the future innovation when it comes to other healthcare or medication issues. What I also find a little bit interesting is that the discussion comes from the US. One must see that the US haven't important any doses of vaccines, so 0. Mm-hmm. Whereas Europe, and one could really criticize that the European Union was not as protectionist enough to say we provide the vaccination just for European Union member states, but the European Union has exported, I think, 200 million of doses of vaccines. So what I think is necessary, and I think this is a mistake that took place also in Europe, is that the states, the US, the European Union, but maybe other states, they should think about boosting up the production of vaccines. And probably, that's my guess, the discussion about lifting intellectual property rights could lead to a boost in licensing systems. So what I would prefer is, yes, there should be a licensing system, but I think it was the company Moderna, providing this Moderna vaccination. Mm-hmm. They stated publicly that they were open to, giving publicly also the how would say, the patent, mm-hmm. But that they saw that it is not possible even to in a very quick manner to be able to produce them the vaccine. So I think licensing is probably the better way, but we will see.
Yes, and also just a point on the side, the Russian vaccine Sputnik, they have offered free technological transfers all over the globe. So that's not something that the Western vaccine producers as such have offered freely. It's interesting just to note that.
Yes, but I think that's very much about geopolitics.
For sure, for sure. But still, it's about saving lives. So at the end of the day,
the discussion about the Sputnik vaccine, Slovakia, they ordered the vaccine and then it didn't fit I'm no expert, but it didn't fit the.
They said that the boxes didn't look the same or something like that, or the vials.
Only about the boxes, so they couldn't say if it was really the same vaccination that the EMA was currently or is currently also looking at. So I think there are some. You have to be very prudent about what you do here because one must not be naive that it's also about geopolitics here.
No, for sure. I mean, that's always in the back, but I would say of everybody's mind, also when it comes to the US.
Also
and
when it comes
maybe Europe should do it more often on the other side. So Europe should think more.
The problem is that Europe is not capable of speaking with one voice. That's I think that's one of the key drivers of NEAS, to say we want a Europe that is really strong in the world and is capable of speaking with one voice. And as long as all the member states, it's not.
No, that's a huge topic, and you're completely correct in that. Let us move now to some past important issues which surrounded COVID, namely the demonstrations and the lockdown measures, and perhaps the role of the police. What is your position on the demonstrations which have been taking place mainly in Vienna throughout the COVID pandemic? First, the police came under criticism for allowing these demonstrations. Then they were banned by them and were criticized because they stood by and did not break them up. Should such demonstrations where no COVID safety measures are followed be allowed, or should they be broken up forcefully as they were in the Netherlands? After all, these demonstrations could have been super spreader events, endangering the lives and the health of the entire population.
I think that's always about balancing pandemic situation and fundamental rights. And I think, or we think, that it is necessary even in a crisis, or maybe perhaps especially in times of crisis, that it is and remains possible to publicly demonstrate one's disapproval of governments or government's measures. So we were always not in favor of prohibiting those demonstrations. But on the other hand, I think it is also possible for the police to give some rules for demonstrations. What we saw in the past is that it is not a good idea to prohibit the demonstrations, because what happened then is that one party, the Austrian Freedom Party, FPÖ, they just created a political event out of this. And what we saw is that aggression on one side, namely the police or the state, prohibiting the demonstration or even maybe pushing the demonstrators closely together, that affected an aggression on the other side. So I think the police should always be, or bear in mind that they should be, de-escalating the situation. But of course, you're right. There were major spreading events, and we even know that because some doctors in some ICUs, they stated that they saw that those people that are on the ICU, that they gathered together in those demonstrating events, or they were in buses that carry the demonstrators across Austria. So this is an issue. And it is, you're right, not only an issue on the individual level. So it's not only the problem for those who are spreaders and infected other people and got infected, but also for the society as a whole, because there were a lot of people then in the hospitals and even in the ICUs. But I think it's always better to de-escalate, and de-escalation means, yes, let them demonstrate.
I mean, the point is very important, because the Austrian Freedom Party and Mr. Kickl instrumentalized these walks, as he called them, through Vienna for his own purposes. He also, and in his faction in parliament, refuses to wear and continues to refuse to wear masks during sessions of parliament, even though all the other factions have decided to make this a requirement. Can the Neos do more to counter this growing opposition force led by Kickl? And how does one fight fake news on COVID that is being spread by various groups to serve political ends?
Well, I think this is a huge discussion. In my point of view, what we see across the world in the last, or what we've been seeing in the last years, is growing polarization. So polarization takes place, and it is even enhanced by the so-called social media. There are no debates longer taking place. It's all about being convinced and convinced again about what your own beliefs. And I think the Austrian Freedom Party, but not only, I think the ÖVP is very good in this as well. They play this game very well. They know how to polarize and to use this polarization. So in my point of view, and I think it's really just a childish attitude. I mean, it's like the FPÖ in the parliament not wearing masks, but wearing masks, for example, when it comes to a party gathering of the FPÖ. Exactly. That's just a childish attitude, like a little child saying, no, I don't wear a mask. But I think it's not the best to on the other hand, enforce this polarization, but being able to talk about that, maybe frame it what it is, namely a childish behavior, but it not like moralize the debate. What I always see is a moralizing attitude towards this debate, and I think this is not very helpful. What our attitude is like to really try to do politics in that way that we say a lot of very complex problems we face right now, they cannot be solved when you look at this is black or this is white. I always say 50 Shades of Grey, but it's not so not so how I say entertaining.
50 Shades of Pink, maybe.
But to be able, even in times where you reduce your political statements to 114 Zeichen on Twitter, characters. Yeah. You have to be able to differentiate your the discussion and to say, it is complex, and we have to find a solution on that. When it comes to fake news, I think there is a growing responsibility for media platforms. I think it is not possible to say for the big companies like Facebook or Twitter to say, we are not responsible for those things that are posted on our platforms. We have to treat those platforms like media. They behave like media, they look like media, so they have respect the same rules as other media. This is one belief I have. And on the other hand, I think on the long run, on the horizon, we will only be successful when we enforce media literacy as a very important skill within our educational system. And I think this is growingly more and more important because when I look at my own media behavior some like 20, 30 years ago, you were focused with like you have the newspapers and, you know, the Courier, they have like this line or beliefs and the Kleine Zeitung and maybe the Kronenzeitung here. No, here. Yeah. And you read those newspapers and maybe you saw the news on television. But now, especially young people, they don't consume media like this anymore. They look for those topics that they are interested in, and they do not care so much about where this information comes from. So I think it is really, really important to stress media literacy within the educational system throughout the whole world.
I think that is a very, very important point that you made. And that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. Another important issue that you mentioned is the big tech companies and their non-regulation at the moment as well. And of course, this is an ongoing discussion. And I think Australia was actually able to win a case against them because they didn't want to post something because their ads weren't allowed. Do you think the European Union is doing enough in this respect in trying to really buckle down against these large, mostly US tech companies to regulate them and, as you say, bring them into the responsibility?
Well, I see some initiatives on the European Union level, yes, but I think there could be more done. Not only about regulations when it comes to like really a level playing field towards other media. I think what should be stressed more is the competition law here, because what we see is that it's a lack of competition. And the problem is it's like they are dominating the whole market. And it's not about only being a media platform, but the problem is they control the media platform market, they control also the data collecting market, and they provide this data to other company parts, but they are all also owned. So in former ways, when we talk about competition law, there was also the discussion about unbundling, you know? And I think this should take place also when it comes to the big players like Google, Facebook, whatever. We should talk about unbundling. Should they be really capable of being such in a dominant market position, not only when it comes to providing a platform, but also when it comes to collecting data, to providing this data, to processing this data? And I think no.
And also related to this on the EU level is the taxation of such companies.
Of course. Of course. This is a major discussion going on. I'm very fond of the change of system that you have to be taxed, not only where you have your seat, but also where you do your business. I mean, one must say this is a really change of what we did so far, but I think this has to take place. But within the European Union, I think it is necessary to really agree on. I do not want to have the tax the same tax levels everywhere, but to have at least a corridor and a minimal tax here, because this is simply not fair when it comes to smaller companies. So I think this also dampers innovation in Europe on a very high level.
Yeah, I mean, I think this discussion really makes sense for those, for instance, who have benefited greatly from the COVID pandemic, because they had the infrastructures in place, for instance, like Amazon, whose sales just skyrocketed because people weren't allowed to go out and buy a T-shirt, and everything was done online. And yes, there weren't any comparable systems, and actually the European Union was not also able to fight against this in any way. So revenue flowed out of the country and out of the continent, and mostly tax-free, actually, at the end of the day.
You're totally right. And I think that this has changed probably fundamentally now during COVID, because I'm convinced that a lot of people got used to buying on the internet and not will go back into the shops as they did before that. So it's not about fairness when it comes to taxation. It's also about the economic structure of Austria and Europe, small and medium-sized scale businesses. And if I might add that, it's also about the question how cities will look alike in the future, because I love my hometown, my home city of Vienna, and I do not want to live in a city where you do not have any small shops anymore. And I think we should definitely enforce this discussion. And it's all about taxation. It's all about level playing field. It's all about competition and enforcing competition law. But it's also about lifting the bureaucracy and the taxation and the affiliated wage costs and maybe other regulations for the smaller and medium-sized companies in Austria. I mean, there is a lot of bureaucracy that they have to cope with. There's a huge amount of taxation and affiliated wage costs. And for example, what Vinicius now stated is maybe temporarily, let's say for this year, let's try to liberalize also opening times in Austria. I mean, if a small shop is not able to open up during the evening hours or even maybe on Sunday, of course, everybody will go shopping on Sundays and in the evening on Amazon. That's for sure. So also the lockdown, this was a critique we had. Mm-hmm. Also the very strong lockdowns. This was nothing but Amazon
boosting activity.
Boosting activity, yeah. Of course. Yeah. And it also shows how Austria and also Austrian companies lag behind digitalization. Yes. Because I really tried hard not to shop on Amazon. For example, I needed a lot of stuff for homeschooling. And I must say, it's not very easy to find an attractive alternative in Austria. I found it, but it's not easy.
Yes, I also really tried to not shop on Amazon. I did shop online, but I tried to find other European alternatives, which are out there. But as you said, one has to make an effort to find them.
Yes.
And hopefully more people will be willing to do that. But to conclude this section of our discussion, I think it's really important that we don't become a mall-based society like in the US, where many inner cities have maybe closed down. As you said, it's nice to have an inner city, and Vienna, which lives on tourism, for instance, it's so important that we have shops in the inner city. Maybe now moving to another topic, which you have mentioned earlier, vaccine procurement.
Yes.
At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, things were moving slowly regarding vaccine procurement. To date, over 2.4 million in Austria have received at least one dose, and over 900,000 have received both doses. The Austrian government came under pressure at the beginning very strongly because there were not enough doses. There was the possibility for more vaccination capacity in each of the states, but it wasn't able to fulfill this because just not enough doses were coming, and these were a big issue. What could the NEOs have done differently and by implication better to ensure that Austria had enough vaccines?
Well, I think the easiest way to improve our current situation would have been to simply order all the vaccination or all the vaccine doses that were available to us, which we didn't do. And, you know, there is a lot of political discussion going on around that issue. The chancellor stated that he didn't know about that, which is simply not true. I must say, this is simply not true and a lie. Austria didn't order all the doses that they could have ordered. So I think this is a failment of government on this side. I'm also critical towards the European Commission, I must say. I think that they underestimated the need for really quick provision of vaccines in Europe. So, and what I also said earlier is I think the European Union didn't focus enough on providing help in enforcing the production of vaccines in Europe. There was some time when we saw that, for example, AstraZeneca, they didn't fulfill their even the number of doses they committed themselves to, but they exported to Great Britain. I simply couldn't understand this, and finally, the European Union really stood up and talked about even an export prohibition for AstraZeneca, and now I think they sued AstraZeneca. There was some time when we looked at the numbers and we had to see that there were more doses exported to Saudi Arabia than from the EU than to Germany or to Austria. So yes, I think that also the EU must be criticized on that level. But I think that Commission President von der Leyen now managed to really have a very significant batch of Pfizer doses delivered much earlier than planned when she decided on ordering like for 2022 and 2023 doses. So I think this was good. But one thing is very necessary. Even if Austria would have received on a quicker basis more doses of vaccination, I'm convinced that because Austria and the Austrian government was not well prepared for January, the Austrian government wouldn't have managed to provide the vaccination campaign towards all people. When the first vaccines arrived Austria, then the discussion started whether it should be the federal state or the states that should do the vaccinations. And I simply cannot understand this. It was clear, crystal clear from July, August on, that there will be vaccines in January. So it was crystal clear that the Austrian government should have prepared for a very solid campaign, vaccination campaign and vaccination regime. I think now we are prepared to provide as many as like 100,000 doses a day, but 2 or 3 months ago, no way. And there is, of course, a problem that we focus on AstraZeneca, mainly probably because it was cheaper, but also because AstraZeneca could have been the way to have a decentralized approach of vaccination, whereas with Pfizer and with Moderna, you need to have a centralized approach. And it is obvious that Austria and also Germany, by the way, focused on AstraZeneca and focused on also all the doctors or the existing health care system to provide the vaccinations, whereas other countries that provided a very centralized way of managing those vaccinations were far more effective on doing so. So I think this is also a failing of the Austrian government. But now it works. And we now are really hopeful that in May and June, there will be so many doses. And I think it's working now really good, that all the people that want to be vaccinated will be vaccinated now.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's really picked up in speed.
Yes.
Would you have been in favor then of a federal organization for the vaccine distribution as opposed to the state solution, which
Yes.
the government supported?
Yes, I would have been in favor of that. And what I think about all the time, if you remember 2 years ago, I mean, maybe the only really reform act that the ÖVP and Chancellor Kurz did was the centralization of the social security system. You know, we have this centralized österreichische Gesundheitskasse now. I said the only reform act because Kurz, he pitched for a lot of reforms, but this is the only thing, the only approach they took. Now we have decentralized social security system, and it is truly interesting that we do not use it to provide the vaccinations. I do not understand it. I simply do not understand it. We have a centralized social security system with decentralized branches all over Austria. It is well known because everybody has a public social security, and it wasn't used for that. I think this is it would have been better to centralize it, also because what we saw is that some states, and also Vienna, especially Vienna, they didn't stick to the vaccination plan. What I mean, what I want to say is that there was a vaccination plan, like in any other country, that stated very clearly that you have to vaccinate first elderly people in elderly care homes, but then all the older people and risk groups, high-risk groups. What we saw in Vienna and in Lower Austria, and we stated that on a very early point in February, that those states vaccinated also a lot of young people, which is fine for them. But we saw a lack of vaccination within the older groups. I think this is one reason why we had this situation, this really difficult and dangerous situation within the ICUs in Vienna and also in Lower Austria, because those states that really sticked to the vaccination plan, they really did better within the health, within providing a protection towards the hospitals and ICUs.
I mean, part of this vaccination plan was also to vaccinate the healthcare workers very on, which makes a lot of sense because they were in close contact with vulnerable groups, for instance, the elderly. But as it turns out, I don't know the latest statistics, but between 50 to 60% of the healthcare workers refuse to take the vaccine. Do you believe, like in other countries, there should be a responsibility for healthcare workers to take the vaccine, or should it be something that they can choose to do or not do? And should there be any consequences associated with this personal decision, which of course everyone can make, in not taking the vaccine in that very special area of work?
Well, this is a very hard discussion. And I must say, I'm in a way ein gebranntes Kind. I don't know how to put it. So I had this discussion, and it was a huge discussion some years ago when it comes to the vaccination against measles, because we have also a very low vaccination rate when it comes to measles, and this is a very also dangerous this is very dangerous illness, yes, for especially also for little children, but not only. And we saw that there are very low vaccination rates also within the pedagogic person and also within the or when it comes to healthcare, people working in healthcare. I think that first you should always try to not put pressure on the people and not make it mandatory. But we have to try everything to push the vaccination rates. I have talked to a lot of people, managers, for example, in elderly care homes, and they clearly said one thing: it is all about education. So what we see, and we must say that very clearly, that mainly the doctors or the people working in healthcare, they have a diploma, they got vaccinated. And the lower the education level is, the lower the affiliation towards vaccination is. I think one part of the problem was also the discussion about AstraZeneca. What I heard about teachers, for example, and they got vaccinated like 60%, that a lot of the teachers were hesitating towards AstraZeneca, which I can understand because the discussion was very broad on all media. But I think we should see and push towards, also with the campaign, towards then other vaccination now, other like Pfizer or Moderna or even Johnson & Johnson. And probably we should talk more about behavioral economic approaches, like incentives. You should give incentives to people to get vaccinated before you talk about any mandatory vaccination regime. But on a very personal level, I can simply not understand why somebody who is working in a healthcare system and sees illnesses and death all the time is not willing to be vaccinated. Because this is not about only, like a lot of people say, this is about individual responsibility. And I think this is not true. This would be true when you talk about FSME vaccination. It is not true about highly infectious illnesses. Then it's not about your individual responsibility, but also about your responsibility towards the whole society, and especially those who are the most vulnerable groups that cannot be vaccinated, for example.
Which, of course, brings us back to the fake news discussion we had before. Yes. My final question, dealing with COVID pass before we move to the future. At the beginning of the pandemic, all parties, including the Neos, supported the work of the government. This was vital and helped Austria get through the first wave of the pandemic very well. The popularity of Chancellor Kurz and the Green Party rose dramatically. As of fall 2020, this changed. The Neos, the SPÖ, and the FPÖ no longer supported most measures proposed to combat the virus. If given the chance now, how would you have led the fight against COVID?
Well, first of all, I think this was an effect that could have been seen in any country, that at the beginning of the pandemic, you had a rally around the flag effect. So everybody rallied around the government and supported the government. And of course, in March 2020, it was a shock. And we had to take some actions. And I think it is clear, and I totally understand, that mistakes happen. If you have to take these decisions on a very quick basis, you make mistakes. This is totally normal. When I'm asked what is a big mistake that has been done by the Austrian government, I would say that it is not that it didn't focus on trust. I think it's all about trust. Do the people trust the government? Do the people trust the measures taken by the government? But also, does the government trust the people? And what we saw during the pandemic was that the Austrian government always took a very top-down approach. It was not about the adherence of the people. It was about regulations. It was about Strafen.
Penalties.
A very top-down approach. One could say that the Austrian government was very good about telling the people what they must and must not do, but they were not good in telling the people why they should do something or not do something. They did never focus on transparency. They did never focus on showing data. They did never focus on really explaining why the situation is as such, and the next steps have to be taken in that way. So the whole thing that is necessary in a pandemic, and I talked a lot to experts on that area, is the adherence of the people. There was never a focus on target groups. Like we saw that there are problems, for example, in autumn in the countryside, families living together in generations, and they had a supper together on Sundays. So the children that are in school, the father that is, and the mother that they go to work and they are mobile, they got infected maybe in an asymptomatic way, so they didn't show any symptoms, and they had lunch or a supper together with the grandparents. I think a communication that is based on really individual responsibility and knowing about the risks would have been really better. This was one part. And the other part was there was no communication on an eye-to-eye level, not with the people, but also not with the parliament. This government, and this is especially interesting because there's the Green Party in government that always focused on democracy and fundamental rights and so on and so forth. This government does not respect the parliament, not at all. The parliament provided a lot of power to the government. So the Austrian government, nearly all the regulations took place on an executive level, by execution, by Verordnungen, and not by laws that were passed through the parliament. And I think this trust in the beginning that came from the parliament towards the government, that was broken many, many, many times. And of course, it was problematic that there is this mechanism. I don't know how to put it, but the ÖVP and Sebastian Kurz are very good in doing news. I don't know how you say, enforcing news and dominating the news. So whenever there was a discussion taking place, probably critical towards the government or the pandemic situation in Austria, for example, when it came to the discussion, do we provide enough protection within the elderly care homes? It was always Kurz that pushed for a new idea that dominated the media. And this new idea was not really, well thought about. It was not decided in a discussion with experts. It was only focused on PR and creating news and dominating the news. What I mean is what's this mass testing experiment taking place in December. Even in October, November, we said, yes, we have to have a good testing regime, testing. But let's focus on testing on a regularly basis in those areas where we know we cannot close them because the side effects, the collateral damages are too harsh, and where people gather together. So in healthcare, like in hospitals, in elderly care homes, also in schools, or if possible in kindergartens, but also in, let's say, logistic centers, or I don't know, big companies where people work together and you cannot keep distance or wear a mask. So testing on a regular basis. So there was a lot of show and not really good and thorough crisis management that we saw. But I think I come back to this. I think the main thing is trust.
Just one final issue on the trust point, which is a very good point. Could one also argue, if I was to be the devil's advocate here, that trust would be like a two-way street in that sense, that when the public saw that the other parties moved away from supporting the government, they too started building up this maybe lack of trust in the positions of what to do against COVID, which then was a circle which then just continued on its own, because then they were not in support of the measures, they didn't follow the measures. So in some way, could you say that the opposition parties also could have maybe done more and in that case, maybe saved a couple of more lives, because the trust would also...
I understand this argument, but I think it's a very dangerous argument, because when you think this through, you come to the point where you say you cannot have any discussion because this is anti-patriotic, or it enforces the dangers within the pandemic. And I can only speak for NEOS. I know that I would say that the Freedom Party went another way.
Another way.
Yes. We were always, and also for the Social Democrats, I think if somebody would comment on how Randy Wagner or me also made suggestions over the last month, nobody would write that we were irresponsible, or nobody would write that I would say, we're not, didn't have in focus or in mind that we should provide reliable information on how to behave and what the risks are. We did a lot of suggestions, and also the SPÖ. And I think this focus on responsibility is always necessary, also for an opposition party. But we cannot have no discussion. And especially when we saw that there are big mistakes made, for example, not protecting the elderly care homes, for example, doing very costly mass testings instead of really focusing on a clever testing regime. For example, when regulations were done by the Minister for Health, just health, yeah, that were not in line with the constitution. We had to say something. I mean, this is necessary in a democracy. So I think it's really dangerous, especially in times of crisis, to not enforce a debate. It's not about quarrel. It's about debate in the best sense of democracy. I think, especially in times of crisis, people probably that are skeptical, they need the debate. They need to see the debate, because otherwise they get the feeling it's only about power on one side and totally Ohnmacht. What's Ohnmacht? I have to look it up.
No power to do anything.
No power at all. So I think it is even more passed out. Okay, this is like really passing out. But it's even more necessary if you have a growing number of people that are skeptical towards measures of the government, to enforce the debate on a very civilized manner, but openly. And this debate could never take place. There was no room for debate. There was a little room in parliament, but there was no room provided by the government. Even in the rounds with the chancellor and the vice chancellor, there was no debate. It was about, okay, what does NEOS say? What does SPÖ say? What does the expert say? What do we say? Okay, thank you. And then we decide. It's no debate. It's not an eye-to-eye conversation. And I know that some states in Austria, they did it totally differently. They had, like, for example, a sure fix every week with all party leader in those states. The Landeshauptmann had sure fixes. So there was information, transparent information given also on the question how you come to decisions, providing to all other parties. The Austrian government didn't go this way. Cooperation is like not a strength of the ÖVP. So political, but also not for the Green Party. I think what was really interesting for me was to see the behavior of the Green part of the government, especially also when it came to the discussion about fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms. I think what I saw, or what I think, is that the Green Party that always said we are so keen on fundamental rights, then argued in a moral way. They said, like, okay, we do not care so much about rule of law and the constitution. Our explanation is moral. as we explain it morally, why it is necessary now to do so. And this is not our approach. I think the rule of law and the limits that the Constitution give also for the executive, like for the governments, they apply whether you have a good cause or a bad cause. Moral has nothing to do with that.
That's a very good ending point for our past discussion. And now to look into the future. Austria's unemployment is slowly recovering. Once opening takes place, it is likely that the economy will pick up. What steps do you see as necessary so Austria's economy recovers as quickly as possible? What policies will the NEO support to enable a quick rise in employment? And since jobs and businesses go hand in hand, what policies will the NEO support that will help businesses?
Yes, that's a very good question. What we saw over the past month is a huge amount of money provided to businesses. And the Austrian finance minister is very proud that Austria spent, I think, that it had the highest spending when it came to helping the businesses. I think this is bad news because, on the other hand, that means that Austria did very badly when it came to the economic situation, and we had really a huge decrease of our economic situation. But all this helping regimes, they were very conservating. And I think it is now necessary to take a step forward and to say, what can we do to enhance, to not only stabilize and secure, like, for example, old jobs, old business cases, old business strategies, but to enhance new jobs, innovation, new business strategies, and a real new start for these businesses. So what our focus would be is enhancing new jobs. Whenever new jobs are creating, the state should help here. For example, by taking over wage costs or ancillary wage costs. I think the Austrian government is now preparing for a project like this. This is very good, and we will definitely support this. It is also necessary to be more focused towards the future when it comes to new business strategies. So also here, not having a conservative approach and say, like, for example, the governments always say we have to have a comeback. In some areas, there will not be a comeback. But what we should enhance and support is that we have a lot of companies that have viable business strategies. They did well before the pandemic situation, probably even though they didn't have so much equity. And this is a huge problem in Austria when it comes to some sectors, for example, tourism or these areas. So we should help those businesses that have a viable business strategy to get over now this phase. And what we NEOs keep in mind there is like a second chance, a reorganization or a restructuring instead of insolvencies of companies. So we should shape the Austrian insolvency system, how you would put it, towards, like, for example, the US Chapter 11, where you really enforce restructuring or reorganizing programs in order to ensure that those companies, those businesses will further exist. And then, of course, it is now time to really focus on the question, what is the USP of Austria? What is the USP of Austria when it comes to being a business location? And one must say that we do not have any raw materials. The only thing we have is innovation. And when it comes to innovation, you have to focus on the educational system. You have to focus on providing enough money for research. And you also have to focus on enhancing new business ideas, new innovative ideas to grow and to you say foster, yeah, and prosper, to prosper. So this is the time to think about the reform of the education system, to boost spending in research activities, like all future activities. Austria does a lot of spending when it comes to financing the past. We have to finance the future, invest towards the future. And of course, we have to talk about liberalization now when it comes to regulation towards starting your business, when it comes to regulation towards running your business, when it comes to also the tax levels, reducing tax levels, and as I said, ancillary wage costs. We have huge ancillary wage costs. And we talk about that, or we see the discussion going on for decades now. So what I say is, no, we do not need a comeback. We need a restart, a new start. And we have to question ourselves in all areas if the way we did it before was the right way. It's not possible to say, okay, we do a little bit here, a little bit there. I think we have to put everything on the table again and to discuss all areas of politics now.
Yes, what you said, I think, would really help Austria moving forward. Yesterday in the news, for instance, a group of businesses approached the media or maybe even the government regarding a Green New Deal for Austria. Have you heard of this? And what would be your position to incorporate this in the ideas that you mentioned moving forward?
Well, I think on a European as well as on an Austrian level, this has to take place. I think this is our we owe this towards the next generation, to our children, to really not only protect the environment, but to effectively and even more effectively cope and fight against climate change. I think what could be an asset here is that we have highly innovative companies, highly innovative industries. And I talk a lot to people in industry, in other areas of the economy. And what they tell me is that they say, hey, we know that we have to do something here, but we want to it's also about trust. We want to be sure what now the policies will be. So what is the road that Austria will take? We want to have a sort of capability to plan for things. I think the most important thing here is to restructure the tax system in Austria. We tax the working force. We tax every job, but we do not tax like, for example, there is no CO2 taxation or fossil, how you put it in English?
Fossil fuel taxation?
Fossil fuel taxation. So I think this is the key to innovation, is also all about a restructuring of the Austrian taxation system. That could be a system compared to yes, this I say the industry in Europe, they have a dealing of it's a market of
buying these credits, these CO2 certificates. Yes,
certificates. So you could foster this also when it comes to other areas. But maybe easier would it be to use, and like our approach is always to use market forces here. Mm-hmm. You have to make an internalization of external costs. So you have to put a price, a higher price towards fossil fuels here. And this is the key. And the Austrian government did a lot of they also agreed on it on the government program, but so far they haven't taken any steps towards that. But I think I also agree. We have highly innovative companies. We have a huge amount of research that is taking place, not publicly funded, but privately funded. So I think we have everything we need. We have clever people, we have innovative people, we have the technologies, we have the knowledge, and we also have the spirit in Austria to really focus towards that future.
I'm also a great fan of Austria. Maybe one more question which would interest our users. In 2022, Austria will hold elections for its president. Will you support Alexander Van der Bellen, should he run again, or will the Neos put up their own candidate?
Actually, we have not decided on that yet. And as far as I know, Alexander Van der Bellen has not decided on whether he will run again or not either. I think it is no secret that we supported Irmgard Gries. So another, if you would say, if we could put it like that, a female candidate that was not part of the traditional party systems, the old parties. But she unfortunately didn't win. But we were also supported Alexander Van der Bellen in the second round. And I think he did very well so far. Although I must say that in the recent weeks, I would have loved to hear clear words from him more often, because the way that the ÖVP is treating with disrespect the constitution, the parliament, the system of justice, the courts, the constitutional court, I think this is very dangerous. It is eroding our system and, again, the trust in the democracy and the democratic institution. And I would have wished for more clear words from him, I must say.
Thank you, Beate Meinl-Reisinger, for this very, very interesting discussion on really relevant topics from the past, the present, and in the future moving forward. Thank you for sharing these thoughts with the listeners of iGlobenews. And would you have any final words to address to our audience before we end our discussion?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Diana. It was a pleasure talking to you and being here. It was very difficult for me to do it again or once again in English, because I haven't spoken English for a very, very, very long time. So I hope that everything was understandable what I thought, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to this session of iGlobenews Pods. We hope you will tune in next time when we will host another very interesting guest and discuss present, future, and past trends and activities. Thank you.